In this video I'm going to be talking about crests and ridgelines. I've had a lot of feedback about the hills really. I think that's what people are most impressed by. It's sort of how smooth flowing and organic looking the hills and slopes are. And that's somewhere where crests and ridgelines provide a particular challenge because they're, well, by their nature not quite so smooth flowing. And I'm going to try and explain why that's a problem and some of the things we can do to resolve that. So it's a quick primer or reminder on the different slope hexes and what I name them, just to make it what talk about much clearer. So there are four basic hill shapes, which I call G1 hex, G2 hex, G3 and G4 hex. So G4 grass, that's what it's normally covered in, even if you want to cover yours in something else. And the number refers to how many high points there are. So G1, G2, G3, G4. And the shapes they make, so a G1 hex is sort of the end of a promontory. If you were to cluster some G1s together, you'd get a shape like this, which is pretty useless, I'd say, but at least it looks fairly rubbish to me. So I wouldn't use them that way. Put some G2s together, and you'll see that so it has what I call an external curve, so it starts to form a ring. And in fact, if I put a riser and an X in the middle, you can form a very simple round hill. It doesn't look too bad, but again, I wouldn't really recommend people build their hills like this. If you're going to have just simple hills like this, then it's not really worth doing hex terrain. You might as well just go back to a flat battlefield with your hills just plonked on top of it. Where the hex terrain really works is where the slopes kind of flow into each other in much more organic shapes. But anyway, that's how the G2 hill hex works. You see how it circles around on itself. We go to the side there, and then G3. These ones here. So these really kind of form a straight line. You put them next to each other, and they just keep on going. So there's no curve there at all. This is a continuous slope. And then a G4 hex. I haven't got quite as many of these, but this is what I would call an internal curve. So if I put a flat hex in the middle and start placing these around, ignore the fact this one's got a trail marks in it. Put the tree on there, and you can see it's forming a kind of this isn't actually a G4, this is a slope one, but the bottom half is the same as G4 hex, so it'll work for this purpose. So you can see it can form this kind of a dell or a hollow crater even. And you can see how that could work. I think probably better if it wasn't a simple circle like this. You need to have a slightly bigger hollow would probably work, be more interesting on the battlefield, or would look better. But it's quite nice, the idea of how to be able to have a bit that drops down the battlefield like that, because it's something which you would not normally get on a standard kind of terrain. It's one of those things that hex terrain can do better than other types. So that's the G4. See how it forms that. It's still a ring, but everything's sloping down to the middle. So those are the four hexes, four sloping hexes, which we will be using. Now for ridges, the obvious way to create a ridge is I guess if you imagine you're going to start at one end of a ridge, in the same way you would start the cliff set into the battlefield, you have your ridge is kind of emerging out of the grassland. We won't worry for a moment if the fact it's flat grassland. This could be higher up on a hillside, but we're looking to create a ridge along here. Now, from this single point here, this is already sort of starting to form a ridge. So I can put a G2 next to it, and if I put another G2, that's our basic ridge formed. And because these G2 hexes I've deliberately shaped these so they'll start to smooth off a bit as they reach the top. It kind of works. I mean, it's certainly not a crisp. It's reasonably flat at the top. It's a bit of a plateau, but it's also a fairly short plateau, so it is basically like a ridge. But you don't have to do it like this. You could make it wider. If you wanted to put in a G3 here, your ridge can move around in a slightly wider shape, less straight line. You could put in a G4 on one side, and you haven't really got it's not really so much of a ridge at all anymore at that point, depending on what you do. You could be a very broad ridge. But if we went for the simple one, so two G2s here, and now look at the other end, we've got this, we're left with a drop down, from which we could put another G1, and that's the end of our very short ridge. It's not particularly useful tactically in the game, not particularly visually satisfying, so there's not much point in doing that really. So instead of that, we can use what I would call G1R, or G1 ridge. So it's got a high point at each end, and that kind of continues this ridge along. And that kind of works. Continuing our ridge. I don't know. Does it work? It sort of does. The biggest problem I find with this is that it's straight. It's a dead straight ridge. And there isn't really any way easily to get one of these ridges to go anywhere other than straight. And I'll show you why. You might have noticed, or I may have asked in the past, why I only have G1, 2, 3 and 4, and why not a G5 hex? So, just aside for a moment, a G5 hex would be one with 5 high points. So I haven't got one exactly like that, but his one's very similar. I did this when I had in mind I was going to build sort of something useful for a barrow down, like in Lord of the Rings. So we'd have a small man-made hill with an entrance at the front into the barrow. So I wanted these to slope down. And I made it, and I wasn't very happy with it for various reasons. The hex itself was fine, but it's how it works in the terrain wasn't brilliant. So this is what a G5 hex would look like. It would have 5 high sides and then 1 sloping down. And as you can see, first of all, this slope is really steep. I mean, much steeper than anything else that we have. And comparing it to a G1, which is just 1 point high, you can see how here the slope carries across the whole, I hope you can see this properly, carries across the whole length of the hexagon, or all the way across. Whereas here, that same change in height has got to be managed between this point and here. So that's across a full 100 millimetres, that's across just 25 millimetres. So it's 4 times as steep, pretty much. And that makes that, there's no way you're going to be able to balance a model on a slope that steep, whereas here it's absolutely fine. So that's the first problem. However, if you wanted to do it, you could shape this differently so that it was more of a kind of a crevice spread across the whole piece. So as in both sides kind of sloped down into a crevice in the middle, lining up with that corner. And then it wouldn't be quite as steep, and you might be able to build some kind of feature in there, maybe a trickle of water. Although keep in mind that that would be pointing towards, a line between two hexes, like this. So anything you modelled on this hex here would just trickle into this crevice here, and you've got nothing modelled on these two hexes to represent whatever that little gully or brook or stream is meant to be. So I don't think that's brilliant. The next thing really is that, and this doesn't show it too badly, but I'll show you a worse example of it than that one. I'll come back to that. So you can see here that by having two sides sloping down, you're kind of forced into the two surfaces coming next to it are also going to be sloping down together. So you're going to have this single line here with two sides sloping into it, which I hope you can see that it just doesn't look good to me at all. It looks very artificial in the way that these two slopes we had earlier, which meet at the same point, that looks fine because I've carefully made sure that these G2 hexes will meet at almost horizontal at the top, very close to horizontal. It works fine, it's good I think. But here, because those two slopes are coming down to meet each other at a point, it just looks wrong to me. And with your G5 hex pointing that, you're forced into doing that. Whatever happens, you're always going to have two slopes meeting. With only one exception I can think of, which would be if you put this at the top of a steep slope. So if you were to have it not meet a flat line here, but have a sloping down line. So for to do that, you're going to have some steep hexes. So let's get an S2 hex there. And what else have I got? It's another S2 here. Okay, and there I think you can kind of get away with it. It slopes down here, continues to slope, and then you spread out as normal onto the flat, or continue a hill if you want to. So there it works, but remember that these steep slopes, again, aren't really suitable for most miniatures to stand on. So you're creating an impassable piece here. Maybe that's fine, maybe you want to have a section that's impassable. But going back to the crest, so if you were to have your crest line going through a corner, so a bend. So instead of going as a straight crest, it's going to go around a bend. It's going to go from one corner here to one here. The only way you do that is if you have this dip in the middle. So your crest will go from here. So let's build up a simulation of what it would look like. We'll ignore this fact that it doesn't meet here. So a crest here, and we want to get through our crest to the other side here. So imagine that this is a crest moving along like that. And that means the only way you can do that is by having a steep slope down to the side here. And you can do what you want on this side, that's fine. Because you've got the remaining 3 points of this hex to play with. So you're very restricted on how you can use that. You can only be on a steep slope, which is quite limiting. So there's a game I play, a World War II game called Crossfire, which includes crests as a sort of a named feature, which have particular game rules about blocking line of sight. But they're a fairly subtle thing in the sense that, I mean, they're quite important in game terms, but they're not meant to be this kind of crest. This kind of crest is like, hey, we're out in the wilderness, let's go on a walk in a mountain, and there's a ridgeline we're walking along. And that's not the kind of place where most World War II battles would have happened, which is where crossfire takes place. They're more a case of there's sort of a particular line at which the ground changes pitch, giving you the opportunity to go prone and take some cover behind that, or if you're standing well back from it, to be hidden from enemy the other side of it, vice versa. And this doesn't really represent that very well to me. But if you are playing a game like that, and I know there are other games which also have crests as a concept. I'll move these out of the way. Sorry for the one's a bit messy. One thing you can do is when you're cutting your rivers. So to cut a river like this, I had to remove a piece of polystyrene like this. Okay. And you can place your, rather than just discarding this, save it and put it on top of a hexagon. This has not been cut to the right depth yet, ignore that. And that could act as your crest, because it has to. In Crossfire, certainly has to be very clearly marked so that both players recognise where it is, and know that unit of troops here will not be able to see unit of troops there, because the crest is between them. That's not particularly pretty, but it only takes a few seconds to sand off the edges of this to make something a bit smoother. And in the same way the rivers are going to meet up, we know that this will line up from hex to hex to form the ridge shape you want. And if you are playing a game with crests as a meaningful thing, I think this is probably the best way of doing it. Even though it doesn't look as smooth flowing or as organic as the main slopes, this is probably the way to go. But if you just want crests for aesthetic purposes only, then the odd bit with something like this, with the G1 ridge, or even if you want to do as I described with having that sharp turns and steep sections, you can do that. And the other thing I thought of is, rather than just having these as grassy sections, if you want to have like a dramatic ridge line, break out the rock moulds and same way you do for your cliffs, and actually build a feature there. Have some rocks coming out of your hexes to form that ridge, and they can be on the flat or they can be on a slope, as you like to suit what you're after. What I find with those rocks is, as long as you're at the edge of your hex, you come back to the proper line. If your rocks come out of it, but they're sort of butted up against the edge, then they'll blend quite nicely with another hex put next to it. Anything else with rocks on it will blend nicely into that. In the same way that I can put any cliffs together, and you're not really that conscious of the join, even though it's definitely there. The sort of, again, overuse the word organic, but the organic shape of those rock features just sort of fool the mind's eye into seeing it as just general cragginess. So yeah, there's some options for crests and ridgelines. Rockiness would be my favourite one for aesthetic purposes. Just these basic ones if you want to have something simple within your slopes. And if you need something for gaming purposes, then I recommend the detritus, the leftovers from when you're cutting rivers, with a little bit of sanding, and then glue that down, grass and terrain, and texture and paint it off your own. Okay, thank you. I hope that was helpful.